समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Donald Trump, with his 57-minute speech at the UN, might have got the headlines for now. Also got the headlines not so much for saying what is predictable, that I stopped 7 wars, although in this case, he said, I'm not doing, people think I'm doing it for the Nobel Prize, but no, I'm trying to save lives, etc. And meanwhile, what has the UN done? UN has stopped nothing, etc. So he shamed the UN, he shamed his allies, his Western allies. He said Europe has allowed open borders and see how they are being ruined. He says London is heading for Sharia law. Also, the president of the US stood at the UN General Assembly and attacked a mere mayor, the mayor of London. In this case, UK being his ally, and where he has just finished his state visit, his very ceremonial state visit. The fact is, he might have got the headlines today, but his presence wasn't the highlight of this UN General Assembly. The highlight of this UN General Assembly, and that is what we are focusing on now, is the appearance of Ahmed al-Shara. See his picture. He's a very impressive man. In fact, if I use Trump's language, Trump described him as an attractive, tough guy with a strong past. That's what he said earlier in May. Now, Ahmed al-Shara is currently the president of Syria. He's the president of Syria, but still he is a designated terrorist. In fact, see this picture on your screens. That is from the US Embassy in Syria, where this poster is displayed of a $10 million bounty on Ahmed al-Shara. So while the US has started the process of de-designating him as a global terrorist, these processes take time. Trump has issued his executive order withdrawing his terrorist status and also the sanctions on him and his organizations, that is HTS. HTS is Shara's organization. In English, it will be translated as Organization for the Liberation of the Levant. Now, Levant is the ancient name for that region, mainly for Syria, maybe Lebanon as well, but generally that region. Now, important thing is that all the organizations that Shara has led on his own, he's avoided any Islamic intonations there. So he's tried to make it more revolutionary or nationalist. He's been careful. In the past, he's been with ISIS, he's been with al-Qaeda. With ISIS, he broke off in say about 2011, 12, thereabouts. Or after that, he tried to set up an ISIS unit of a kind in Syria, which worked for some time, but he went out on his own. He built an organization of his own, which then became loyal to al-Qaeda. In 2016, he broke away from al-Qaeda as well, because al-Qaeda by now was finished. It was not even a pale shadow of its past. Most of its more committed people had subsequently gone to ISIS. Many of them had even died by now. So he set up pretty much a domain of his own in the northwest of Syria, in a place called Idlib. It's a sizable place. This became like a tiny republic of his own, and from there he ran his reign, and for some reason he was able to avoid getting bombed by Russian planes, because Russia was then supporting the Assad regime and he was at odds with the Assad regime. So really interesting character, only 43, born in 1982. In fact, he'll be 43 next month in October. He became the first Syrian leader, the first to address the UN General Assembly in 58 years. 58 years, as you can calculate, count backwards, was 1967. 1967 was the year of the Six-Day War that Israel won quite easily, and among the territories Israel captured and never returned. Sinai Desert, it returned, but the territories it never returned included Golan Heights. Those were taken from Syria. Even if you look at al-Shara, Ahmed al-Shara. Ahmed al-Shara is his original name, but he had taken a nom de guerre, and that nom de guerre also harked back to his origins, to the fact that his family belonged to a village in Golan Heights. Golan can be Jalan, and that's why his name, his nom de guerre, when he started fighting, was Abu Mohammed al-Jawlani. 1967, the year of the Six-Day War, was the last time a Syrian president spoke at the UN. He was Nuruddin al-Atasi. And at that point, Hafiz al-Assad was defense minister in 1967. Ultimately, power came to him in Syria by 1971, and he then founded the Assad dynasty. Assad over time became an enemy of Israel and remained an enemy of Israel, as did his son Bashar. They basically drew their power from Syrian people's hostility, but the larger Arab hostility with Israel. They also had the pending issue of Golan Heights, which they wanted to take back. Israel, meanwhile, in the course of time, annexed the Golan Heights, and Trump even recognized that annexation in his first term. So that big issue remains between Israel and Syria. Now, what is it that al-Shara has been saying, and why is it that he's being patronized like this? This is the first time in the history of the UN designated terrorist, including by the UN. He's designated a terrorist by the Americans, by the EU, and by the UN as well. Even that designation has not yet been lifted, because all of these things have to go through a due process. It's the first time that a designated terrorist is addressing the UN General Assembly, and is also the center of attraction. So what has he done? He's had a meeting with Marco Rubio, where Americans have also explained what is it that they expect from him. He's also had a fascinating conversation with General David Petraeus. General David Petraeus, as you might remember, was the head of CIA, where he lost his job because of some indiscretions. But before that, he was a serving American general, the commander in Iraq. And he's the one who had also arrested Ahmed al-Shara in Iraq in his earlier avatar, that is under his nom de guerre, which is Abu Mohammed al-Jawlani, one from Golan Heights. He was in jail. He spent, in fact, 2003 to 2011, 8 years with a few breaks. He escaped for a while to Syria, then went back to Iraq and joined ISIS. That was Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi's group. Now, why did he go to Baghdad? In 2003, when the first bombing started in Baghdad with George Bush's invasion, with the junior George Bush's invasion, lots of young people from Syria, other Arab countries, they got into buses and they went to Iraq to fight for Saddam Hussein. So first, he fought for Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein lost. And then Iraq sort of broke up, and the Iraqi resistance to the American occupation, that turned into a guerrilla war. That is what he joined. In the course of that, he was arrested and he was in a bad jail for quite some time until 2011, when he was released somehow, and he came back to Syria, and then he started setting up his own organization there. The initial organization he set up was Jabhat al-Nusra li al-Sham, which is the support front for the victory of the people of the Levant. I told you he never used any Islamic words or Islamic symbolism in his organization. So clever guy. Maybe he's somebody who saw the future. And that then became HTS, which again sounds like a national liberation movement, but not an Islamist movement. In the course of time, he fought with Baghdadi, the ISIS chief, and he distanced himself from ISIS, because from everything that I read about him, and I will share with you a long article about him from Financial Times. This is by Raya Jalabi in March this year, and the article is headlined "The Secret History of Syria's New Leader, Ahmed al-Shara." And if you see that, you can see maybe there's a little bit of airbrushing there, because the Western world is now embracing this guy. But it was to indicate that he wasn't as hardline or cruel, and he wasn't as much violence for the heck of it, or violence for the sake of violence, or with the larger ideas of destroying all nationalism in all Muslim countries and creating a larger caliphate. He was not given to that. And you can see now he's a very pragmatic guy, the evidence of which comes from the conversation that he had with David Petraeus. In that conversation, he said some interesting things. One, he has said that Syria and Israel are in advanced security talks, but any deal reached will fall short of the Abraham Accords. Abraham Accords, as you know, fully recognize Israel, embassies are exchanged, all hostilities and claims are dropped. But he says this will fall short of Abraham Accords. Why? Because he said normalization is possible, but not that kind of normalization, because there is great anger in the Arab world about Israel, particularly over what's going on in Gaza. And second, he said the difference between us, that is Syria, and the other countries, the Arab countries that signed Abraham Accords, is that we are neighbors. They are not neighbors of Israel. But he's made this point that he's willing to settle with Israel. In other places, he's indicated that he's even willing to cede Golan Heights to Israel, so it formally becomes internationally acknowledged and recognized territory in Israel. He wants a few things in return, but he hasn't yet defined that. However, it is quite clear that he and the Israelis are talking. Israelis are much more at peace with him than with Assad. They don't see him as enemy, and that is the reason the Americans and the Western powers have also embraced him. Can you imagine if Osama bin Laden had lived long enough, or since he was Saudi, if at some point through some chakkar he had acquired control of Saudi Arabia, and then US president and the Western powers embracing him and also showcasing him at the UN. Syria is an important country, not as big as Saudi Arabia, not as important as Saudi Arabia. I only use Saudi Arabia because Osama bin Laden was a native of Saudi Arabia. So let's leave that aside. But the example is a bit like that. A designated terrorist known to have killed through his organization thousands of people, if not tens of thousands, accused or charged with having carried out at least 40 suicide bombings. He is now being hailed as the new star internationally in UN during the annual General Assembly session. Now see how this has progressed. May 13, for example, Trump announced that he will be lifting sanctions on HTS and al-Shara. He said sanctions were important until a time they served their purpose. That purpose has been achieved. But now it's their time to shine. There means Syria. Now it's Syria's time to shine. So I say, good luck, Syria. Show us something special. However, we are confining ourselves to what's been happening between Trump and Syria. On May 13, he announced that he's lifting the sanctions. On May 14, he met al-Shara. That is, Donald Trump met al-Shara in Riyadh. That was during the big summit meeting in Saudi Arabia, and this was organized by Mohammed bin Salman, who is the de facto ruler, as we know, of Saudi Arabia. And in that meeting, Erdogan also joined on the phone. Now, Erdogan had been in many ways the patron and supporter of al-Jawlani's or al-Shara's group in Syria. Because Syria is a complex story that we've told you earlier in 2 episodes. We will share links of both of those to you. So you figure out how in Syria everybody was fighting on some side. And it looks like everybody was running their own proxy wars just using Syrian people, Syrian soldiers, Syrian terrorists, Syrian militias, and Syrian armed forces as well. Turkey was also a participant there, and Turkey's client there was Ahmed al-Shara's group. That's how Erdogan also joined this discussion. June 30, the US formally lifted the sanctions, and sanctions, while these were lifted on HTS and al-Shara, these remain in place on Bashar al-Assad, his associates, those accused of drug trafficking or gun running or human rights abuses or indulging in stockpiling chemical weapons. At the same time, Trump decreed to Marco Rubio to complete formalities so that HTS is no longer designated as a foreign terrorist organization or a state sponsor of terrorism. Then in August, Americans started drawing down their soldiers. They had about 2,000 in Syria in 3 camps. These are called MSS, so Mission Support Site. One was MSS Green Village. The other was MSS Euphrates. Euphrates is the name of the big river there. There, small bands of American soldiers and special forces and those manning electronic sniffing equipments, they were working in coordination with Kurdish nationalists. That was drawn down from 2000 to about 1400, and since then looks like Trump intends to withdraw all of them or maybe leave a few there if he can trust Ahmed al-Shara to look after his interests in Syria. Now, there's a pattern to this. Sometimes people might say that Donald Trump doesn't know what he's talking about, he changes his mind. But see what he said on December 7, 2024, when al-Shara's forces were marching in and Assad's regime was crumbling. So Trump said, it's a long post, you can see it on your screens, but I will just sum it up for you. He said Syria is a mess, but is not our friend. The US should have nothing to do with it. This is not our fight. Let it play out. Do not get involved. And that's precisely what he has done. He's let this play out. Now, whether he and the CIA and his forces were involved from behind the scenes to help Ahmed al-Shara, we don't know. We'll wait for books to be written about that in the course of time. But you can see that when Assad regime was crumbling, Trump was quite happy to let it play out. In that sense, you can say it was a shrewd call. It's also possible that that was a call also inspired by Netanyahu and Israel, because this suited Israel. Remember, Syria was critical to Iran being able to use Hezbollah, because Iran's access to Hezbollah was through Syria, because Iran had access through Iraq, because in Iraq, Iran is very influential through large Shia groups. From Iraq, Iranians would come into Syria, and through Syria, they will go into Lebanon and keep on supporting, leading, resupplying Hezbollah. So it suited Israel. Nothing suited Israel more than the fall of Bashar al-Assad. And that's where you can see that most likely Israelis also got involved, or they were quite happy to see Ahmed al-Shara rise to power in Syria. And that is how this new kind of alliance may be a strong word, but this new kind of arrangement has come in, where Israel and the Americans both have a friendly power in Syria, by no means democratic, another autocrat, and another authoritarian ruler. But Americans love authoritarian rulers, particularly in Muslim countries, because they'd much rather deal with one person. And we should know that well, because look at the people the Americans have found easiest to deal with. The people Americans have really patronized and loved in Pakistan. That is Ayub, Yahya, Zia, Musharraf, and now Munir. So Americans like, these are, now Pakistan is not comparable with these Arab countries, right? Pakistan is a more complex situation. But still you can see the American comfort in Islamic countries is with authoritarian rulers. And in Syria now, Americans seem to have found just the ruler they wanted. And in this case, that's also the ruler that Israelis wanted. Now, what is it that the Americans are looking for? Americans or Israelis as well, what are they looking for? What are their expectations? What are their KRAs, key result areas for al-Shara? So I will list 6 for you. Number 1, that he should ensure peace with Israel. That is something that Rubio also said after his meeting with al-Shara, that he's discussed with Ahmed al-Shara. That way, Israel has one front fully covered and secure, and with no access to Iranians there and no Hezbollah there. Number 2, find and destroy all chemical weapons. Now, Assad had promised to give up chemical weapons. He had also allowed international inspectors to come in. They found 27 sites and shut them down. But it's widely believed that many sites still remain, maybe even up to 100 sites, small and big, still remain. So second ask from Ahmed al-Shara is find and destroy chemical weapons. Number 3, manage foreign fighters, because Syria had these tens of thousands of people, Islamic fighters who came in from many countries and who then became loyal to many different groups, usually groups warring among themselves, and many just became bands of thugs. So he has to now hunt them down, catch them, either kill them or deport them. I don't know who will take them back. Deport them or rehabilitate them. That's the third ask. Fourth, remove all Palestinian militant camps, because over time many of the Palestinian armed groups have set up their camps and units not far from the Israeli border on the Syrian side. So he has to remove those. Number 5, find missing Americans. So there are few Americans who various groups in Syria have taken captive in the course of time. One of these is journalist Austin Tice. Now, Shara, being smart, met Austin Tice's mother, because he's saying he's trying to find these missing Americans. In fact, he met her even before he started meeting the families of tens of thousands of Syrians who've been missing and who he has to now track. And the point number 6, that the Americans, and whenever I say the Americans, I mean the Israelis also, the point number 6 on which Americans want delivery from him is to totally prevent any resurgence of ISIS, which is a common threat for all. It's also a common threat. It's also a common threat for Arab countries, for Israel, for the American power, for the Iraqis, for Iranians, everybody. That's the common enemy. So those are the 6 broad points on which America expects delivery from Ahmed al-Sharaa. And as far as al-Shara's reward is concerned, he's got some of it in advance, like an advance payment. And that is this grand legitimization and lionizing at the UN General Assembly.